Welcome back. I was working through a new script this week when I came across a detail so quietly precise, it stopped me mid-read. The protagonist does not rage. She does not confront. She simply renews a membership. That is the move. That is the weapon. You are watching historical manhwa. The smell hit her first, not the antiseptic bite of a hospital, not the wet cardboard weight of a funeral home. What hit Nadia Voss at 6:47 in the morning on a Tuesday in March was the smell of her own apartment, the cedar of the closet, the faint ghost of last night's garlic from the kitchen 3 rooms away, the particular warmth of a duvet that had been slept in by one person for too long. It was the smell of a life she recognized. It was the smell of a life she had already lived. She did not sit up immediately. She had learned in the 12 seconds between unconsciousness and full wakefulness to lie still and catalog. Her right hand pressed against the fitted sheet. Egyptian cotton. A thread count she'd been embarrassed about spending money on. 720 threads per inch because Carter had told her they were worth the splurge. Her left hand found the edge of the mattress, the small divot where the foam had started to compress, and she mapped it with her fingertip the way a blind person maps a face. The ceiling was off-white. There was a water stain near the window that the super had patched but never properly painted over. The curtains were the pale linen she'd chosen from a catalog she no longer remembered the name of. There was a phone on the nightstand. The screen was black. Nadia closed her eyes. In another life, in the life she had just finished living, she had died on a Wednesday in November. 3 years and 8 months from this exact moment. She had died in a hospital bed in the cardiology unit at Mercy General, and the last thing she had seen was the acoustic tile ceiling and the particular, terrible blue of Carter's eyes, watching her from the doorway as if she were a problem he was calculating how to manage. He had not come to her bedside. He had stood in the doorway. That detail had followed her into whatever dark space existed between one life and another. And it had followed her back out. She opened her eyes. The ceiling. The water stain. The pale curtains. March. 3 years and 8 months before she would die of a stress-induced myocardial infarction that the cardiologist would later describe to Carter, who was already in the process of divorcing her, who had already hidden $470,000 in assets across 3 shell accounts she hadn't known to look for, as sudden onset, precipitated by prolonged stress. Common in women her age, who exhibited certain patterns of cortisol dysregulation. Carter had nodded. He had asked about the paperwork. Nadia reached for her phone. The screen lit up. The date confirmed what the ceiling had already told her. Tuesday, March 14th. She was 33 years old. She weighed 141 pounds. She had a corporate law degree from Georgetown that she'd been letting calcify in the margins of a paralegal position at Harmon. A Reese and Duke because Carter had suggested, warmly, over a dinner she'd cooked, that the full attorney track might be too much while they were trying for a baby. They were always trying for a baby. They would never have one. What they would have instead was 3 years of financial hemorrhaging, a mistress named Bethany Park who ran a wellness blog with 40,000 followers, and a divorce proceeding so aggressively structured against Nadia's interests that her first life attorney had later called it one of the most methodically premeditated asset extractions he'd ever encountered in family law. She had not known any of that yet. The first time she lived this Tuesday. She knew it now. She set the phone face down on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling for another 4 minutes. She was not panicking. She had decided, somewhere in whatever passage connected the end of one life to the beginning of another, that she would not waste a single minute on panic. Panic was for women who did not know what was coming. She knew everything. The question was sequencing. Carter was still asleep beside her. She could hear his breathing, that particular low, even rhythm that she had spent 7 years finding comforting, and that she now understood was the breathing of a man with an uncomplicated conscience, because men without consciences slept better than anyone. He smelled of the cedar closet and something else, something that her first life self had always interpreted as his particular skin chemistry, but that she now recognized, with the cool clarity of hindsight, as the very faint underlay of Bethany Park's perfume. A white musk. Not expensive, the kind that clung. She did not move. She lay beside him, and she built the architecture of what she needed to do. the way a structural engineer surveys a site before a single nail is driven. She thought about what she had and what she needed and what she could not afford to get wrong. What she had, a perfect memory of everything that would happen if she did nothing. She had the names of the shell accounts, she had the timeline of Carter's asset transfers, the exact dates, the amounts, the routing numbers she had memorized during 3 sleepless nights in the first life after she'd finally hired a forensic accountant who'd found them 6 weeks after they were already legally outside the clawback window. She had the knowledge that Carter's catering business, which he would not start for another 7 months, which he would present to her as a passion project, a small thing, something for us, would grow entirely dependent on the wholesale pricing he accessed through her Costco executive membership. She had the knowledge that by month 11 of that business, he would be lending her membership card to Bethany, to his mother Sandra, to 2 of his business partners, and to a cousin named Drew, who ran a restaurant supply side hustle in Torrance. She had the knowledge that Costco's membership agreement was one of the most precisely enforced consumer contracts in American retail. She had read it herself the first time after the fact. She had found the clause about household-only card sharing, and she had sat with it for a long time, understanding what it meant, understanding what she could have done, what she needed, time. Patience, a forensic accountant on retainer before Carter began hiding anything. And a Costco executive membership that she would maintain, renew, and keep in her name alone. What she could not afford to get wrong, the order of operations, the timing of each move, the face she wore while she wore it. She turned on her side, away from Carter, and pulled up her banking app. She had $82,000 in savings. She had a brokerage account with $19,000 that her first life self had left largely untouched because Carter had suggested, warmly, over the same dinner table, that index funds were probably the safer bet for someone without a finance background. She opened the brokerage app. She thought about everything she knew about the next 32 months of the market. She made 2 decisions before Carter's alarm went off at 7:15. Small decisions, precisely targeted, each one a load-bearing wall in a structure that would take years to complete. When Carter rolled over and reached for his phone, she was already in the kitchen. She had made coffee, the cheap kind, because they had the expensive kind at the office, and she had always secretly preferred the cheap kind, and she was done performing preferences she didn't have. "Morning," Carter said from the hallway, his voice rough with sleep, his hair pushed up on one side. She looked at him over the rim of her cup. "Morning," she said. She had looked at him from this exact position 1,000 times in the first life. She had always felt something when she did. Tenderness, anxiety, affection in the particular register of a person who is not quite sure they are loved back. She had spent 7 years trying to earn something from Carter Voss that he was constitutionally incapable of giving. And she had burned through her savings and her health and finally her heart muscle trying. Now she looked at him and felt nothing. It was not the nothing of grief or numbness. It was the nothing of a person who has already settled the account. It was a clean 0. "You made the dark roast," he said, opening the cabinet for a mug. "I did. Thought we finished it. I bought more." He poured his coffee and they stood in the kitchen in the particular domestic silence of a marriage that looked functional from the outside, and Nadia thought about the Meridian Convention Center. In her first life, Carter had landed the catering contract for the Meridian in month 19 of his business. It had been the thing that tipped the operation from a scrappy side business to a real revenue stream. And it had been the contract that made his wholesale Costco access critical rather than merely convenient. Without Meridian pricing, he'd been paying enough for his margins to survive. With Meridian, he needed to maximize every input cost, which was why he'd started passing her membership card around like a business card. She knew that the Meridian's current exclusive catering contractor, a company called Seraph Events, had a contract expiring in 4 months. She knew this because she had seen the paperwork in Carter's files in the first life, because Carter had been paying a contact at Meridian for early notice of the RFP. She knew the terms Seraph had been charging. She knew the areas where their service had been weak: staffing turnover, setup delays, a recurring issue with their cold storage management that had generated 2 formal complaints from Meridian's events director, a precise and exacting woman named Gloria Trent. She had 4 months. She set down her coffee cup and told Carter she was going in early. He nodded without looking up from his phone. So the particular quality of his distraction, the way he angled the screen very slightly away from her, was something her first life self had interpreted as work stress. She'd been thoughtful about it. She had not asked invasive questions. She had given him space, as women who love absent-minded men learn to give space. She glanced at the screen angle and filed it. She went to work. Harmon. A recent Duke occupied 4 floors of a building in downtown Los Angeles that smelled of recycled air and printer ink, and the particular staleness of fluorescent lights left on too long. The carpet was the industrial gray blue of airport terminals. The coffee in the break room was from a machine that made a sound like a small animal in distress. Nadia had been a paralegal here for 3 years. She knew every exit and every power center and every attorney who had forgotten that she had a law degree. She sat at her desk at 7:52 before almost anyone else had arrived, and she pulled up the State Bar website and began navigating toward the application for attorney reinstatement. She had let her bar membership lapse in the first life. She had let it lapse because Carter had suggested, gently and at dinner, that maintaining bar dues while they were trying for a baby and saving for a house seemed like an unnecessary expense. She navigated to the continuing education requirements. She calculated the timeline. She could be a licensed practicing attorney in California within 90 days, given her existing education and the CLE credits she'd allowed to lapse. She would need to pass a short ethics examination. She would need dues. She would need to have a frank conversation with the managing partner of Harmon, Reese, and Duke about her actual credentials. She pulled up Richard Harmon's calendar. She had a meeting at 2:30 that she'd requested 2 days ago in the First Life's timeline, except in the First Life, she'd requested it to ask about a raise for her paralegal work. Today, she would be asking something different. She wrote herself a note. She kept it in plain language because she had learned in the First Life that the most precise plans are the ones that sound simple. The note said, bar reinstatement, meet Harmon, position renegotiation, forensic accountant, Meridian RFP, Costco membership, do not add Carter. That last line. In the First Life, Carter had asked her to add him to her Costco membership in month 4 of knowing each other. When they'd been dating seriously and she'd taken him to the Costco in Burbank, and he'd been genuinely delighted by the sample tables and the rotisserie chickens and the 40-pound bags of jasmine rice. She had laughed at his delight and added him as a household card holder before they were even living together, which was technically against the terms of service, but which Costco had never enforced because the addresses hadn't been checked. Though when they moved in together, it had become technically legitimate. When they married, it had become thoroughly legitimate. In this life, she would renew her membership this month. She would not add him. And when Carter eventually asked, he would ask, in approximately 7 months, in a casual, offhand way that made it feel like a small domestic logistics question, she would add him. She would add him because she needed him to use it, to rely on it, to build his margins around it. To share it with Bethany and Sandra and Drew, the restaurant supply cousin in Torrance. She needed him dependent on it before she dismantled it. That was the architecture. It was not a complicated move. That was what she had understood, reading the Costco membership terms in the First Life, sitting in her hospital room with the printout her sister had brought because Nadia had asked for something to read. She'd read the terms in the way a person reads a document they wish they'd read years earlier, with the particular ache of information arriving at exactly the wrong time. Costco's membership terms were clear. Primary cardholders held an executive or Gold Star membership. Household cardholders must reside at the same address as the primary. The card sharing, allowing non-household members to use the card, violated the terms of service and was grounds for immediate membership revocation without refund. In cases of deliberate, repeated, or commercial-scale violations, Costco reserved the right to permanently ban both the primary cardholder and any associated household cardholders from membership, permanently. Carter's catering business, Voss and Table, would generate an average of $240,000 per year at its peak. Approximately 31% of its operating costs would run through her Costco executive membership. She had seen the receipts in his files during the divorce proceedings. Her first attorney had subpoenaed them, and she'd spent 3 evenings reading through every line item. Paper towels and aluminum foil in industrial quantities. Olive oil by the case, Kirkland brand chafing fuel. Frozen appetizers that he'd charge out at restaurant-grade markups. The 2% executive member reward that showed up as a check in the mail every February had been a $400 check in year 2, which she'd deposited without understanding what it meant, and a $900 check in year 3, which she'd also deposited, and which Carter had photographed because he'd been using it as informal documentation for his business profitability when pitching investors. Where her membership had been load-bearing infrastructure for a business she had never been compensated for supporting, she understood that now. She also understood that the infrastructure was entirely under her control. The meeting with Richard Harmon lasted 40 minutes. She had prepared for it the way she used to prepare for law school exams, which was to say thoroughly and without mercy for her own gaps. She had written out every likely objection and its response. She had printed her Georgetown transcript, her original bar admission documents, and the CLE completion requirements from the State Bar website. She had worn the gray blazer that she'd spent 2 months in the first life trying to justify buying, and that she now wore without justification because she was not performing hesitance anymore. See, Richard Harmon was a compact man in his mid-50s who wore bow ties and rotating colors and had been practicing corporate and employment law since before Nadia was born. He had hired her as a paralegal because she was precise and because she never asked questions that made him feel crowded. He had not asked about her credentials beyond the paralegal certificate because he had not needed to. He looked at her across his desk now with the particular expression of a senior attorney confronting information he should have had earlier. "You passed the bar," he said, "in 2015. I let my license lapse." Why? She had prepared an answer for this, a clean answer. Personal decisions. I'd like to reverse them. He looked at the Georgetown transcript. He looked at her bar admission documentation. He looked at the CLE calculation she'd included, which showed that she could be reinstated within 90 days with targeted coursework. "What do you want?" he said. It was not quite a question. A renegotiated position. Hourly to salary, associate level, not senior. I'll earn the senior designation. "You've been doing paralegal work." "I've been doing associate level work on a paralegal line item. The Castillo brief, the Meridian Group consultation." She had included that last item deliberately. She did not work on the Meridian Group consultation in the first life. It had gone to a second-year associate named Felix Park. But she knew it was happening, and she knew Felix was struggling with the contract renewal terms, and she knew that the correct answer to the Meridian Group's question about their vendor termination clause was not what Felix had drafted. Harmon looked at her. "You know about the Meridian situation," he said. "I've overheard enough." It was not entirely a lie. She had overheard things in the first life. She had filed them in the way paralegal staff file things they are not supposed to know, which is carefully and without comment. "If I could look at the draft," she said, "I could show you what I'm worth." He slid a manila folder across the desk. He did it slowly, watching her. She opened it. The draft was 9 pages. She read it at the pace of someone who had processed a great deal of legal language under pressure, or which was the pace of someone who had actually practiced law, and after 4 minutes she set it back on the desk. "The vendor termination clause defaults to California Commercial Code Section 2309 when no notice period is specified," she said. "Felix has left the notice period blank. In the absence of specification, the default is reasonable notice, which for a commercial catering contract of this scale, a court would likely interpret as 60 to 90 days. The Meridian Group wants immediate termination rights in case of service failure. They won't get them with this draft." Harmon said nothing. "I'd add a performance-defined termination clause," she said. "Triggered by documented service failures, you'd want a written notice and a 10-day cure window before termination rights activate. It tightens the client's position without overreaching in a way that alienates Seraph." Harmon looked at the draft. He looked at her. "The existing Seraph contract expires in 4 months," she said. He looked up. "I did overhear that," she said. A long pause. The fluorescent light above his desk made a sound like a thought that could not quite complete itself. He picked up the draft, looked at the vendor termination clause, set it back down. 90 days, he said, for the bar reinstatement. During that time, you work at paralegal rate on associate-level assignments. When the reinstatement clears, we renegotiate compensation. I'll need the Meridian account included in my portfolio." He looked at her for a moment that felt longer than it was. "Ambitious," he said. It was neither criticism nor compliment. It was the word of a man recalibrating. "Yes," she said. She stood, gathered her documents, and thanked him in the way that conveyed that she considered the meeting complete. She went back to her desk and sat down and allowed herself 30 seconds of stillness. In the first life, she had spent 3 years in this building contributing ideas through a filter. The filter of being a paralegal, of framing expertise as overheard, of making attorneys look good by making herself invisible. She had done it because Carter had made her feel that ambition in a marriage was a kind of aggression, that a wife who was professionally aggressive was a wife who had already decided to leave. She now understood the mechanism of that belief and who it had served. She opened her laptop and navigated to the Costco website. She pulled up her account. Executive membership, current through September. She clicked through to the household card section. Primary cardholder, Nadia Voss. Household cardholders, none. She read the household cardholder eligibility language one more time, even though she knew it by memory. Must reside at the same address as the primary cardholder. She confirmed her address. She closed the tab. She did not add Carter. The forensic accountant's name was Rosalind Cho, and she worked out of an office in Culver City above a dry cleaner's, and she smelled of green tea and ballpoint ink, and she was the best at what she did in Los Angeles County. Nadia knew this because in the first life, she had hired Rosalind 6 weeks too late, and Rosalind had found Carter's shell accounts anyway, out of professional pride, and had told Nadia exactly what had happened, and exactly when it had happened, and exactly what the legal options were, now that the statute of limitations on clawback had closed. Rosalind had been meticulous and furious on Nadia's behalf, which was perhaps the most kindness anyone had shown Nadia in the final year of her life. She sat across from Rosalind now in an office that smelled of green tea and ballpoint ink and said, "I need ongoing forensic monitoring of my husband's financial activity. Well, I need it documented, and I need it to begin immediately." Rosalind looked at her without expression. "You want to document asset concealment before it starts. I want to document everything from the beginning. If there's nothing to document, I'm paying a retainer for peace of mind." Rosalind's expression didn't shift. "And you believe there will be something to document?" "I have reasons to believe there will be." The dry cleaner below them was pressing something. The hiss of steam rose through the floor at intervals. Rosalind picked up her pen and set it down again. "The earlier the documentation, the cleaner the chain," she said. "That's my understanding. I charge $350 an hour. Retainer is $5,000. Nadia took a check from her bag that she'd already made out. Rosalind picked it up and looked at it. "You wrote this before you came in." "Yes." A pause. Rosalind filed the check. "I'll need full access to any joint accounts, tax returns, property records. If he has a business entity at any point, I'll need that too." "When he starts one," Nadia said, "I'll bring you everything." Rosalind looked at her for a moment in the way that precise people look at other precise people. The particular recognition of someone who understands that information is infrastructure. "When?" she said. "When?" She would not elaborate. She did not need to. She thanked Rosalind, who did not waste time on pleasantries, and she left the office above the dry cleaner and stood on the sidewalk in the particular flat light of a Los Angeles afternoon, and felt something that was not exactly satisfaction but was adjacent to it, the feeling of a first nail driven into a load-bearing wall. She went home and made dinner. She made the pasta Carter liked. She set the table. She poured wine. She sat across from him and she listened to him talk about a difficult client and a coworker who'd taken credit for his work and a documentary he wanted to watch later, and she said the right things in the right places. And she did it all with the equanimity of a person who has already decided how this ends. He asked if she was feeling okay. She said she was tired but good. He said she seemed different. She said she'd had a productive day. He nodded and turned back to his pasta. So she watched him and thought, "In 7 months, you will ask me to add you to my Costco membership. In 8 months, you will give the card to your mother. In 9 months, you will give it to Bethany Park, whose white musk perfume is currently in the fabric of your jacket lining in the closet. In approximately 26 months. After I have documented every transfer and every account and every shell entity, and after your membership has been revoked and your margins have collapsed, and your Meridian contract has gone to someone else, you will file for divorce and you will discover that the woman you thought you were divorcing does not exist." She poured more wine. She smiled when he caught her eye. The forensic work was quiet, and it was slow, and it was the most important thing she did in the first 6 months. Rosalind sent monthly reports. At first, they were unremarkable. A joint checking account, a savings account, Carter's individual retirement account, his modest investment portfolio, a credit card he kept in his own name for work expenses, standard domestic financial landscape. Nothing Carter had done yet. He was not yet hiding anything. He would not begin hiding things for another 14 months. Hyman Voss and Table started generating real revenue, and he began understanding the leverage it gave him. Nadia filed every report. She kept them in a folder on a hard drive that she kept in a locked drawer in her desk at Harmon, Reese, and Duke, and she kept a duplicate copy in a safety deposit box at a bank where she was the sole authorized user, and she kept a third copy with Rosalind. 3 copies of nothing. For now. The 3 copies of a baseline that would matter enormously once the baseline changed. She passed her bar reinstatement examination in June. She did not tell Carter until she already had the paperwork in hand. She framed it as good news delivered with the particular modesty she'd always used for her own achievements. The modesty that was really just preemptive deflection. Because Carter had a way of responding to her good news that was technically supportive, but that contained a hairline fracture of something else, something that she had spent years pretending not to feel. "That's great, Nadia," he said, looking at the paperwork. "Really? When did you have time to do all the CLE courses?" "Evenings," she said. "I didn't notice." "I know." He looked at her. The hairline fracture was there, right at the edge of his smile. "So you're going to be practicing again?" "Harmon offered me an associate position." "Associate. Wow." He handed back the paperwork. "Does it pay better?" "Yes." "Well, that's good timing, especially with the Costco membership renewal coming up." She kept her face neutral. "What about it?" "I was thinking—" He set down his fork. It was the gesture of a man about to make a small, reasonable domestic proposal. "I was thinking it'd make sense for me to have a household card. You go twice a week. I could start handling the household runs. Takes that off your plate," she thought. Month 7, on the nose. She said, "That makes sense. I'll add you when I renew in September." He nodded. He picked up his fork. He said something about a documentary. She did not write anything down. She did not need to. The Meridian Convention Center RFP dropped in late July. Nadia received it as an attorney of record at Harmon, Reese, and Duke, because she had spent 4 months making herself indispensable to the Meridian relationship, and because Gloria Trent, the events director, had requested her specifically on 2 client calls, and because Richard Harmon was a practical man who understood that client relationships followed competence. The RFP was detailed and specifically technical, as RFPs for large convention venues always were. Food minimums, staffing ratios, cold chain compliance requirements, liability insurance thresholds, setup and breakdown windows, exclusive corkage policies, the specific question of whether the caterer could provide in-house AV integration with food service timing. Gloria Trent was precise. Her complaints about Seraph had always been about the gap between what they promised in proposals and what they delivered under pressure. Nadia spent 3 days reading vendor responses from Seraph's previous contract bids, which she had quietly requested from the Meridian file as part of the ongoing legal work. She read them the way she read everything now, not for what was there, but for what was missing. Seraph consistently overpromised on staffing and underdelivered during peak service windows. Their cold storage compliance records showed 2 documented gaps. Their setup timelines were optimistic by an average of 22 minutes. She wrote a detailed vendor assessment that she framed as legal due diligence on contract risk. She sent it to Gloria Trent with a note that said, "In the interest of full disclosure and to help you structure your RFP response evaluation criteria." Gloria Trent called her that afternoon. "This is thorough," Gloria said. "I thought it might be useful. You've been in the contracts long enough to know what matters to us. You've been clear about your priorities." A pause. The sound of an event space in mid-setup, distant banging and rolling carts. "The RFP closes in 6 weeks, Gloria said. "We're hoping for something different this cycle." "I imagine you will get it," Nadia said. She spent the next 2 weeks preparing a quiet analysis of caterers in the greater Los Angeles area who had the operational capacity to serve the Meridian at scale. She was not a caterer. She was an attorney, but she knew how to read financial statements. She knew how to assess operational risk in vendor contracts, and she knew that one of the caterers on the Meridian's own preferred vendor list, a company called Linden and Grove Events, had recently brought on a new operations director and had been looking for an anchor contract to stabilize their expansion. She called Linden and Grove. She explained precisely what the Meridian needed. She helped them structure their proposal. She connected them with the right insurance broker to meet Meridian's thresholds. She did not do any of this as Harmon, Reese, and Duke's attorney. She did it as a consultant on her own time, in the evenings while Carter watched documentaries. She billed Linden and Grove at consulting rates. She filed the income separately. Linden and Grove won the Meridian contract in September, 48 hours before Nadia renewed her Costco executive membership. She did not tell Carter about Linden and Grove. She did not tell Carter about any of it. When he asked about her work, she described the cases she was allowed to describe. When he asked about Meridian, she said the contract work was ongoing. She renewed her Costco executive membership. She added Carter as a household card holder because he lived at her address, because he was her husband, because that was the technically compliant thing to do. She logged the date. Carter's business, Voss and Table. I launched in October with a private dinner event in Silver Lake that got a small write-up in a local food blog that Nadia read and did not comment on. She congratulated him. She meant it in the way that one means something that is technically true. She did believe he had a talent for hospitality. She had always believed that. She had also always known that his talent for hospitality was funded by an operational infrastructure that he had not entirely constructed himself. In the first life, she had felt proud. She had organized her calendar around his event dates. She had been the person who triple-checked the linen order and the person who made the backup call to the staffing agency when someone canceled. She had done it because she loved him and because she believed the business was partly hers. In this life, she watched him organize his first event from a comfortable distance and felt nothing except a precise interest in the operational details. She was cataloging the wholesale lists he was building, the vendors, the pricing, the way the Costco runs were already shifting from household items to commercial quantities. By month 3 of Voss and Table, Carter's Costco runs were producing itemized receipts that no domestic household required. Cases of chafing fuel, 40-unit trays of Kirkland vacuum-sealed salmon, boxes of single-serve olive oil packets at a price point that only made sense if you were serving them to paying guests. He was running the business through her membership. She had expected this. She had permitted it, technically, by adding him as a household card holder. She watched him check out and she thought about the executive reward building in her account. She thought about how it would look when someone from Costco's loss prevention team audited the purchase history. She thought about the purchase quantities against the household size. She thought about the months to come. In November, Carter's mother Sandra visited from San Diego. She stayed for 4 days. On the second day, Carter handed her Nadia's Costco card. "For the run," he said. "I've got the installation." Nadia was in the kitchen doorway. She heard it. She watched Sandra take the card. She noted the date. "Nadia," Carter said, noticing her. "Sandra's just going to grab some things for the dinner Saturday." Sandra held up the card in a cheerful, harmless gesture. "Hope you don't mind, sweetheart." Nadia smiled. "Of course not," she said. She went back to the kitchen. She made a note on her phone under a contact name labeled R for Rosalind. Date, time, the transfer of the card. She did not elaborate. Rosalind did not need elaboration. She needed documentation. In December, the card went to Bethany Park. Nadia knew it had gone to Bethany because she checked the account's purchase history online and saw a transaction at the Costco in West Hollywood, which was not a Costco that Nadia or Carter ever used because they were on the east side, for a purchase that included, among other items, Kirkland brand organic coconut oil in a 3-pack, a wellness brand protein powder that Kirkland had briefly stocked as an exclusive, and a case of sparkling water in the flavor that Bethany Park had specifically described in a social media post 3 days earlier as her current obsession. Nadia screenshotted the post. She screenshotted the purchase history. She stored them in the folder on the hard drive in the locked drawer. She did not say anything to Carter. She smiled when he brought home flowers on a Tuesday for no reason, which was a thing he occasionally did when he was managing guilt. And she put the flowers in a vase, and she waited. The waiting was the discipline. In the first life, she had always been reactive. She had responded to crises as they arrived, which meant she was always arriving at the scene of an emergency that had been in preparation for months. She had attributed this to bad luck and to the opacity of other people's intentions. She had understood too late that it was a matter of position. She had always been positioned downstream. Every piece of information she received had already passed through someone else's filter. She was not downstream now. Now she received information first. She cataloged it, she cross-referenced it, she kept Rosalind updated with dates and document numbers, and Rosalind turned it into formatted files with timestamps and sourcing notes because that was what you needed when you were eventually going to use this information in a legal proceeding. In February, Carter's business partner, Luca Medrano, a man Nadia had met twice and assessed as someone who relied entirely on Carter's operational instincts while contributing social access, used her Costco card at a location in Pasadena. The purchase included 40 pounds of bulk coffee and a pallet of paper products consistent with event supply. The following week, Drew Voss, Carter's cousin in Torrance, the restaurant supply side hustle, made a purchase at the Torrance Costco that included items consistent with commercial resale margins. Nadia had specifically looked up Drew's business entity. He operated a sole proprietorship called Pacific Supply Company that had a DBA filing and a vendor license. Using a Costco membership for commercial resale through a separate business was not permitted under the membership terms. It was, in fact, one of the explicit exclusions. She printed the purchase history going back 90 days. She printed Drew's business registration. She printed a copy of the Costco membership terms. She put them in the folder, she renewed her gym membership the same week, and she started sleeping 8 hours a night, and she stopped monitoring her own cortisol with the specific dread that had characterized the last 2 years of her first life. She had been living, in the first life, with the low-grade physiological state of someone who knew something was wrong but could not find it, the adrenal cost of a threat you can sense but not name. She knew the name now. She had known it since March. Naming a thing does not neutralize it immediately, but it stops the ambient damage. You stop bracing for something that is already standing in front of you. You simply look at it and you make your plans. Voss & Table landed its first large institutional contract in the spring, a series of corporate dinner events for a real estate development firm, monthly, for 8 months, at a rate that made Carter's numbers suddenly serious. He bought a van. He hired 2 people on a part-time basis. He opened a business checking account in the name of Voss & Table, LLC, which Rosalind flagged immediately and began monitoring. Carter told Nadia about the contract over dinner with the slightly careful enthusiasm of a man who is performing modesty in the presence of someone whose support he requires. He said it was a big deal. He said it was what they'd been working toward. He said we. Nadia said she was proud of him. And she meant it in the same technical way she'd meant it before. She asked about staffing. She asked about cash flow. She asked the questions that an invested spouse would ask. And she filed the answers. She made a note to call Rosalind the next morning. The Meridian connection was still 8 months away in the original timeline. In this timeline, the Meridian had already signed with Linden and Grove. Carter would learn this eventually. He would not connect it to Nadia. There was no reason to connect it to Nadia because Nadia had been careful about the structure of her involvement. She had advised Linden and Grove as a private consultant. Her fingerprints were not on the Meridian contract in any form that would be visible to Carter. She had thought about this. She had thought about whether she needed to close that door entirely or whether it was enough to leave it unmarked. She had decided it was enough to leave it unmarked. Carter did not look for things he wasn't already suspicious of. He was a man of confident assumptions, and his assumption about Nadia was consistent and established. She was capable. She was steady. She was not the kind of person who planned 3 moves ahead. He had built his understanding of her in the first life's version of her, the downstream version, the one who found out things after they had already happened. She let him keep that understanding. It cost her nothing. The second year of Voss & Table was the year of the Costco dependency. She tracked it through the purchase history and through the receipts that Carter occasionally left on the kitchen counter and through the specific exhaustion in his voice when he mentioned supplier costs. He was good at controlling expenses. He had a talent for it. He understood wholesale margins, and he understood the arithmetic of volume discounts, and he had built Voss & Table's cost structure around the assumption that he would always have access to Costco executive pricing. That assumption was load-bearing. The purchase history showed the scope of it. In month 16 of Voss & Table, The Costco membership generated over $12,000 in business-related purchases in a single month. The executive reward check that February was $1,100. Carter had deposited it into the Voss and Table LLC account, which Rosalind documented. He had been treating Nadia's membership reward as a business asset, which it was not. Because the membership was in Nadia's name, and the reward was generated by Nadia's account. She documented that too. She also documented in a separate file that she was building carefully and with Rosalind's guidance, the pattern of asset transfers that had begun in month 14 of Voss and Table. Carter had opened a secondary personal savings account at a credit union she had not known about in the first life. She knew about it in this life because Rosalind had flagged an inquiry on his credit report and traced it. The credit union account was small initially. He moved $2,000 into it from his personal checking in month 14, framing it as an emergency fund. Rosalind's report noted it without alarm. It was the kind of thing a financially prudent person might do. In month 15, he moved $5,000 more. In month 16, he transferred the 2% executive reward check. The pattern was beginning. It was earlier than the first life. In the first life, she had estimated the transfers began around month 18, when the business became more profitable. She had not known about the credit union account. She had not caught the reward check. She had not had Rosalind's eyes on the financial landscape since the beginning. She called Rosalind after month 16's report. "The reward check," she said. "Documented," Rosalind said. "And the pattern." "It's early," Rosalind said, "but it's consistent with what you described." "I want to add a second stream. His business account. I'd need documentation of your standing. You're not a signatory on Voss and Table." "I have documentation that the membership generating the reward check is mine," Nadia said, "and that he deposited that check into a business account." "That's commingling." A pause. The hiss of the steam from the dry cleaner below was faint over the phone. "I can work with that," Rosalind said. "It's not straightforward, but it's a thread." "I don't need it to be straightforward," Nadia said. "I need it to be documented." "Then let me work." In month 20, Drew Voss from Torrance made a significant commercial purchase, $1,800 at the Torrance Costco, that Nadia's account history showed clearly. She had the purchase record. She had Drew's business registration. She had the transaction detail that showed items inconsistent with personal household use and entirely consistent with commercial restaurant supply resale. Bethany Park had made 6 Costco purchases through the card in the past 6 months. The West Hollywood location, the Culver City location, one in Santa Monica, items consistent with a personal household and a wellness content creator's supply needs. The purchases were not extraordinary individually. Cumulatively, they represented a household card being used by someone who did not reside at Nadia's address, which was the definition of a membership violation. Sandra Voss in San Diego had made purchases at the San Diego Mission Valley location on 3 occasions. Luca Medrano had made purchases twice more, both at commercial-scale quantities. The total picture was this. In the 20 months since Carter had been added as a household cardholder, the account had been used by 6 people, of whom only 2, Carter and Nadia, resided at the household address of record. 3 of the additional users were making purchases that appeared commercial in nature. The account's purchase volume was consistent with small business wholesale acquisition, not domestic household use. She assembled the documentation. She did it in a single evening at the desk in the second bedroom that she'd converted to a home office while Carter was at a venue walkthrough for a corporate event. She printed everything twice, one set for the locked drawer, one for Rosalind. She wrote Rosalind a brief email. "Please review the attached and advise on whether this constitutes sufficient documentation for a Costco terms of service complaint. I want to understand the process and the likely outcome before I proceed." Rosalind replied within 2 hours, which was unusual for Rosalind. "Yes, this is more than sufficient. The pattern is documented across multiple users, multiple locations, and includes what appears to be commercial resale, which is a specific prohibited use. Costco's membership enforcement team takes these complaints seriously, particularly at the executive level where the annual volume is high. The outcome is typically revocation of the primary membership, revocation of all associated household cards, and in cases involving commercial misuse, a permanent ban. I'd recommend you be prepared for all associated cardholders to be notified. That means Carter is in addition to the others." She read the email twice. She was not rushing. She needed 3 more months. In those 3 months, she needed Carter to reach a specific level of dependency, a specific ratio of his operating costs flowing through the account, such that when it was removed, the damage to his margins would be structural rather than merely inconvenient. She also needed the divorce documentation to be in a cleaner state. Rosalind had started tracking the credit union account and had found 2 additional transfers in the past month. The picture was clarifying. She also needed her own position to be unassailable. She was now a second-year associate at Harmon, Reese, and Duke, handling corporate contract work with a specialization in vendor and supplier agreements. She had a separate consulting stream from 3 other clients she'd built relationships with. She had a savings position that had grown considerably, partly from the improved salary, partly from 2 investment positions she'd taken in January and September of the previous year that had performed exactly as she'd expected them to, because she had known they would perform. Her financial landscape was entirely separable from Carter's. That was not an accident. In the first life, their finances had been intertwined in the particular sticky way of a couple that had never sat down and clearly delineated who owned what. Accounts that were technically joint but functionally his. Property bought in both names but managed by him. A shared history of expenditure that, when decomposed by a forensic accountant during divorce proceedings, had looked far more like her subsidizing him than like a marital partnership. She was not subsidizing him now. She had not subsidized him in this life. She had been precise. 3 more months. She called Costco member services on a Thursday morning in early autumn when Carter was at a venue and the apartment was quiet enough that she could hear the specific hum of the refrigerator. She had chosen the day deliberately, not a weekend, not late in the month, not a time when the call center would be understaffed. Thursday mornings, in her experience of large consumer service organizations, were handled by staff who were past the energy deficit of Monday and had not yet reached Friday afternoon's decline. She had chosen the morning because she wanted a supervisor available if the initial representative needed to escalate. She explained, calmly and precisely, that she believed her membership card had been shared in violation of the terms of service. She gave her membership number. She offered to provide documentation. The representative's voice was careful and neutral, which was the correct response for this type of complaint. She asked if Nadia would like to speak with someone in the membership services team. Nadia said she would. She was on hold for 4 minutes. The hold music was the particular bland instrumental that all large corporations use, which is designed to occupy just enough of the ear to prevent you from feeling that your time is being disrespected, while also preventing any emotion that might lead you to hang up. She had always found it interesting. The membership services representative came on the line. Her name was Diane, and she had the voice of someone who has processed a great many of these calls and who approaches each one as a documentation exercise rather than an emotional event, which Nadia respected. Nadia explained the situation. She did not editorialize. She did not describe how she felt or what Carter had done to her marriage. She provided the facts, the membership number, the card holder in question, the additional users she had identified, the purchase locations, the approximate dates. She noted the commercial-scale purchase pattern and mentioned Drew's business registration in passing, without emphasis as a contextualizing detail. Diane was quiet for a moment that had the specific quality of note-taking. "Would you like to provide written documentation?" Diane asked. "I would prefer to," Nadia said. Diane gave her an email address. Nadia wrote down the name of the Costco Regional Membership Director, who Diane said would handle the documentation. His name was Martin. "How long does the review process take?" Nadia asked. "It depends on the documentation," Diane said, which was the correct non-committal answer. "Typically 2 to 3 weeks for complex cases." "I'll have documentation to you today," Nadia said. She sent the documentation within the hour. It was precise, organized, and presented in the format of a legal exhibit package, chronological, sourced, and with a brief cover letter that explained the situation in the same calm, factual register she'd used on the phone. She did not include anything that was irrelevant. She did not include anything that would appear emotionally motivated. She presented it as the documentation of a factual pattern, which it was. Then she sat in the quiet apartment and she called Rosalind. "It's in motion," she said. Rosalind said, "The credit union account had 2 more transfers this month. He's accelerating." How does the picture look overall? Clean, Rosalind said. I mean clean in the sense that it's very clearly documented. His side, not yours. Good. She ended the call. She went to the kitchen and made coffee, the cheap kind, the one she actually liked, and she stood at the counter in the afternoon light and she thought about nothing in particular for approximately 6 minutes. Which was more stillness than she had permitted herself in a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called her sister. Her sister's name was Joanna, and she lived in Portland, and she had an opinion about everything. And she had been the person who brought Nadia a printout of the Costco membership terms in the first life, in the hospital, when Nadia had asked for something to read. Joanna had not known what the printout would mean to Nadia. She'd been trying to be helpful. She'd been trying to give her sister something to do with her hands and her mind during the particular inert dread of a hospital stay. Hey, Joanna said. How are you? I'm good, Nadia said. I wanted to talk. Yeah? I think I'm going to file for divorce. A pause. Nadia. I know. Are you? Did something happen? Nothing specific. Everything accumulated. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. The afternoon light was the particular gold of early October. The kind that makes everything look like a memory. I think I've known for a while. I just know it now. Joanna was quiet for a moment in the way that close sisters are quiet when they are recalibrating everything they have been carefully not saying. Okay, she said finally. Do you have a lawyer? Nadia almost smiled. I am a lawyer. Nadia, you need your own lawyer, not yourself. I know. I have someone in mind. Who? A woman I know from a seminar. She does family law. She had identified the attorney 6 months ago. She had already had one very brief, very informal conversation with her, framed as professional networking, which had given Nadia enough to know that she was the right person for what was coming. She was not the attorney Nadia had used in the first life. That attorney had been good, but had arrived too late and with incomplete information. This attorney was earlier, and Nadia would arrive with everything. Okay, Joanna said again. She sounded steady now. She had shifted into the mode of a sister who is going to be helpful. Are you safe? Is there anything I should be worried about? No, he's not dangerous that way. Carter's damage was financial and relational. He was not the kind of person who got physically dangerous when cornered. He was the kind of person who got lawyerly and cold and very carefully strategic. She had prepared for that version of him. What do you need? I'll tell you when I know. Right now I just wanted someone to know. They talked for another 20 minutes. When she hung up, the apartment was getting dark. She turned on the kitchen light. She thought about what dinner required. Carter came home at 8. He smelled of event venue and white musk. He kissed her on the cheek and said the venue had gone well. She told him dinner was in the oven. He said it smelled great. She set the table. She thought about the documentation package sitting in Martin's inbox at the regional membership office. The revocation came on a Tuesday. She knew it had happened because she checked the account online and found the status changed. Not suspended, revoked. The notification email came 12 minutes later, directed to her address as the primary cardholder. She read it at her office desk, over lunch, with the particular stillness of someone reading a document that has confirmed a calculation. The email was formal and administrative. It explained that her membership had been revoked following a review of account activity that indicated violations of the Costco membership agreement, specifically the household card sharing provisions and evidence of commercial resale activity associated with the account. Because of the nature and scale of the violations, the revocation applied to all associated cardholders. Associated cardholders were notified separately, but due to the commercial resale element, the account was flagged for permanent ban. Any application for new membership would be reviewed against this flag. She read it twice. She forwarded it to Rosalind. She typed, "For the file." Then she opened a new browser tab and navigated to a retail warehouse membership comparison page. She had already selected a Costco Business Center competitor arrangement that served most of the geographic area Carter's events covered. The pricing was about 12 to 15% higher than Costco's executive member wholesale pricing, depending on product category. The difference was not catastrophic on a per-unit basis. On the scale that Voss and Table was operating, particularly the Meridian-level volume Carter had been planning to add, it was the difference between a margin that worked and a margin that bled. He would figure that out. She thought about when Carter would figure it out. He would try to use the card before he checked the account status. He would check the account status when the card declined, he would read the notification email, and he would call member services. And member services would explain, with the precise neutrality of trained customer service staff, that the account had been revoked and that he and all associated cardholders were permanently banned from membership. He would probably ask to speak to a supervisor. The supervisor would say the same thing in a different register, but with the same outcome. He would want to know who had reported the violation. Member services would not tell him. The policy was clear. The complainant was confidential. He would think about who might have reported it. He would think about Sandra. He would think about Bethany. He would think about Luca and Drew. He might not think about Nadia, because Nadia was the primary cardholder. And primary cardholders do not report their own accounts. That was the assumption he would operate from. And the assumption was understandable, and it was incorrect. She closed the browser tab. She ate the rest of her lunch. It was a salad with a dressing she'd made that morning that had slightly too much lemon in it and was better for it. Her phone rang at 3:17. It was Carter. She answered. "Hey," he said. His voice had the texture of controlled frustration, which for Carter meant tight and very even, every word placed precisely, no excess breath. "Do you know anything about the Costco account?" "What about it?" "It's been revoked." She let a beat pass. "What? Why?" "I'm trying to figure that out." The even quality of his voice was holding, but only just. "Did you get any notifications?" "I got an email. I thought it was spam and I deleted it." She said this in the particular tone of a person reporting a domestic error, slightly embarrassed, slightly distracted, entirely plausible. "What did it say?" "It says our account has been revoked for," she heard paper, "for violations of the household card-sharing provisions and something about commercial resale." A pause. "Which I don't— Nadia, this has to be a mistake. Can you call them?" "Of course," she said. "I'll call when I get out of this meeting." "Is it urgent?" "I have a Costco run scheduled for Thursday." "I'll call today then." "Oh, I'm sure it's something they can fix." "They said it's permanent." She let another beat pass. This one calibrated to the length of genuine processing. "Permanent? That doesn't— What does that mean, like they shut the account down permanently?" "They banned us," Carter said. The even voice had cracked very slightly on the word banned. "All cardholders, permanent ban." "That's extreme," she said. "I'll call right now." "I'm sure there's been some mistake." She called member services from her desk. She was put through to a supervisor. She expressed genuine-sounding confusion and asked for clarification. The supervisor explained the situation in the same neutral register she'd heard before. Violations of the household sharing policy, evidence of commercial misuse, ban applied to all associated cardholders. The supervisor was sympathetic to her confusion and firm about the outcome. She thanked the supervisor. So she called Carter back. "They're saying it's final," she said. "I don't understand how this happened." "Someone reported us," he said. "What? Who would— I don't know." His voice had the particular quality of someone conducting an internal audit in real time. She could almost track the process. Sandra, Bethany, Luca, Drew, the West Hollywood location, the Torrance location, the commercial scale purchases. He was mapping the exposure. So he was not quite willing to land on Nadia because Nadia did not compute as the reporting party. "I'm going to figure out who did this." "Carter." She put a specific note in her voice. Not urgency, not alarm, something closer to the measured concern of a person who has just realized there's a real problem. If someone reported it, if there were violations, were people using the card who shouldn't have been? A silence. "It was a business decision," he said carefully. "The margins required it. The membership is in my name." Another silence. "Yes," he said. "I know." "I don't know how to fix this," she said. "If they've revoked it, they've revoked it. You'll need to find another supplier arrangement." "I know that." His voice was very flat now. I need to know who reported it." "I hope you figure that out," she said. "I have to get back to this meeting." "I'm sorry, Carter." She ended the call. She sat for a moment at her desk. So the fluorescent light above her made its usual sound. Outside the window, a food delivery motorcycle was navigating the midday intersection with the particular aggression of someone running on a tight schedule. She opened her laptop. She opened the document she'd been drafting for the past 3 weeks, the one that Rosalind had reviewed and that she'd discussed with the family law attorney, whose name was Margaret Flores, and who had taken everything Nadia brought her with the focused interest of someone who recognizes an exceptional case. The document was the petition for dissolution. Everything was in order. The grounds, the asset documentation, Rosalind's reports, the financial forensics, the shell account transfers, the misappropriation of the executive membership reward checks. She did not file it that afternoon. She needed 4 more days. In 4 more days, Carter was scheduled to make his Thursday Costco run that he would not be able to make, and she needed him to experience the operational reality of that gap before the petition arrived. She needed him in the specific position of a man who has just watched a load-bearing wall come out and is realizing, in the disoriented way of someone mid-collapse, that the structure was not as stable as he'd believed. She needed him managing a crisis. Men who are managing crises do not prepare. They react. They do not consult attorneys preemptively. They call their regular attorney on an emergency basis and explain the situation under pressure. Emergency basis calls produce advice that is reactive rather than strategic. Reactive advice is always, structurally, less precise than the advice of an attorney who has been briefed carefully and at length over months. She had briefed Margaret Flores carefully and at length over months. She went back to the document on her screen and read through it one more time. Thursday came. Carter's Thursday run did not happen. He had spent 2 days calling every wholesale supplier he had a relationship with, getting quotes, and finding, with mounting and very quiet alarm, that none of them offered the combination of product range and pricing that Costco had provided. He came home Thursday evening looking like someone who had done arithmetic he did not like the outcome of. He did not tell her the full arithmetic. He told her that the supplier situation was complicated and that he was working on it. She said that was stressful and she hoped it resolved quickly. He said he thought he knew who had reported the membership. She did not look up from the book she was holding. Who? I think it was Bethany. She turned a page. Who's Bethany? A long pause. She heard the particular silence of a man who has said a name he should not have said. She manages social media for one of my vendors. There was a disagreement about a payment. I think she might have reported it as retaliation. Oh, Nadia said. She looked up. She looked at him with the expression of a woman who is following a story. That's awful. Can you do anything about it? I don't know. He sat down heavily on the couch. He put his head back. I'm going to call the membership office again on Monday. I want to see if there's any appeals process. I hope there is, she said. He looked at the ceiling. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man whose margins were deteriorating and who was also managing a secret that had developed an unexpected audit trail. We'll figure it out, she said. She said it in the specific register of a woman who has been saying things like this for years. He heard it the same way he'd always heard it, as reassurance, as steadiness, as Nadia being the ballast. He said, yeah, thanks. She turned another page. The petition was filed on Monday. Margaret had it delivered by process server at Carter's office address at 2 p.m, which she had chosen because it was the time of day when Carter's calendar consistently showed him between events, not in the middle of a service, not in transit. She wanted him to receive it in a place where he could sit with it without the operational demands of a running event requiring him to set it aside. He called her at 2:47. She did not answer. He called again at 3:15. She did not answer. He texted at 3:22. The text was, Nadia, call me. She was in a client meeting. She sent back, in meetings all afternoon. We'll call tonight. He sent back, this is serious. She sent, I know. She did not send anything else. She returned to her client meeting. The client was discussing the vendor termination language in a supplier contract. And she had a specific and well-researched opinion about how to structure it. She called him at 7:30. He answered on the first ring. What is this? He said. His voice had the flatness of someone who has spent several hours cycling through emotional states and has landed finally on controlled. You received the petition. Yes, I received the petition. He said received in the register of a man who has received something he cannot entirely believe. And can you just come home and we talk about this? I'm not going to be doing that, she said. A pause. What? I'm staying with my sister. This was true. Joanna had come down from Portland 2 days earlier, which Carter had interpreted as a general visit. I've retained Margaret Flores. All communication should go through her office. Nadia. His voice shifted. Something came up in it that in the first life she had always interpreted as love, and that she now recognized as the specific register of a man who needs something from you. We can work through whatever this is. We can talk. The petition covers it, she said. Margaret will be in touch with your attorney. I don't have an attorney. You'll need one. He was quiet for a moment. She heard him breathing. She heard, in the background of wherever he was, the sound of a city that was continuing entirely without regard for his particular crisis. The Costco thing? He said. Did you report it? She did not answer immediately. She waited the length of a breath. Margaret's contact information is in the petition header, she said. She'll be available from 9 tomorrow morning. She ended the call. The divorce proceeding took 7 months. Carter retained an attorney on emergency basis, as she had anticipated. His attorney was competent, but was working from a disadvantaged information position, as she had arranged. The asset documentation Rosalind had assembled was comprehensive and predated any effort Carter made to restructure his holdings. Every transfer to the credit union, every movement of Voss and table revenue into personal accounts, the misappropriation of the executive membership reward checks, in which Margaret had included as evidence of his pattern of using marital assets for unilateral personal benefit. Carter's attorney argued that the business transfers were legitimate operational decisions. Margaret produced Rosalind's documentation showing the transfers predated any formal business structure that would have made them operationally justifiable. She produced the dates. She produced the amounts. She produced the routing numbers. Carter's attorney argued that the membership reward checks were incidental amounts. Margaret produced the 3-year accumulation, the deposit records, and a letter from Nadia clarifying that the membership had always been in her name, and that she had never consented to the reward funds being directed to the Voss and table account. The shell account transfers were the most significant element. 3 accounts, $470,000 in total. I moved in a pattern that began 14 months before the divorce petition was filed. Rosalind's documentation showed the full timeline. Carter's attorney argued that some of these funds represented legitimate business expenses. Margaret produced the business expense records that contradicted this in specific line items. The settlement conference lasted 2 days. Carter left with considerably less than he had expected to leave with. When considerably less than he had managed to hide in the first life, because in the first life, the hiding had been well underway before anyone was looking. In this life, Rosalind had been looking since the beginning. He also left without a Costco membership. Voss and Table survived the divorce, technically. He restructured it. He found a commercial food distributor that offered some wholesale pricing, though at terms that were 8 to 12% less favorable than the Costco arrangement had been. He lost 2 ongoing clients in the margin adjustment period when he was forced to reprice contracts that had been built around supply costs he could no longer access. He did not lose the business entirely. He was competent enough not to lose it entirely. But the growth trajectory, the arc he had been on, the arc that had led in the first life to a successful mid-size catering operation that he'd sold 4 years later for $800,000, that arc did not continue. The math changed too much too early. She knew this because she tracked it from a comfortable distance, through the way that information moves in industries where you have contacts, through the particular ambient intelligence of a woman who pays attention. She did not monitor it obsessively. She noted it the way you note the outcome of a calculation you already completed. The answer confirmed the work. On a morning in late spring, almost 2 years after she had first woken up to the smell of cedar and cheap coffee and Carter's particular breathing, she renewed her Costco membership. This time, it was under a different address. Her own apartment, the one she'd moved into 7 months earlier. 3rd floor, east-facing, with windows that let in the kind of morning light that made the cheap furniture look intentional. She had bought a couch she actually liked. She had a coffee maker that produced the dark roast she'd always preferred and never had to negotiate about. She stood in the Costco in Burbank on a Saturday morning with a cart that held a 32-pack of sparkling water in the flavor she actually liked, a large bag of the frozen dumplings that required no explanation and no performance of culinary ambition, 3 pounds of the good Parmesan, and a case of olive oil that she would use at her own pace without tracking against someone else's business costs. The executive reward from the previous year had been a check for $200, which was modest because this version of the account was hers alone. The purchases were hers alone. The reward was hers alone. She unloaded the cart at the register. The woman scanning her items had the particular efficiency of someone who has done this 10,000 times and takes a professional satisfaction in the speed. The scanner beeped. The cart emptied. "Executive?" the cashier said, glancing at the card. "Yes," Nadia said. The total appeared on the screen. She paid. She loaded the bags back into the cart. At the exit, the door checker, a young man with very careful handwriting who drew an elaborate checkmark through her receipt, smiled and wished her a good weekend. She walked through the parking lot in the particular flat brightness of a Southern California morning, loaded her trunk, returned her cart to the corral, and sat for a moment in the driver's seat before starting the car. She did not feel triumphant. Triumph was for the moment of the move, and the move had already been made. He had been made many moves ago. What she felt now was closer to the sensation of a mathematician who has finished a long proof and is reading back through the lines to confirm the logic held. It had held. Every line of it had held. She started the car. On the seat beside her was a client file she needed to review before Monday. A corporate vendor dispute with a termination clause issue that had a very specific and correct answer, and she was already thinking about the correct answer. And the sun was coming through the windshield at an angle that made everything look slightly luminous, and she pulled out of the parking spot and into the lot and then into the street and drove toward the freeway because she had somewhere to be and she had a full tank of gas and she had 4 hours before her afternoon was her own. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. She did not look at it. She already knew who it was. Carter had been trying to reach her for the past 3 weeks through channels that were not Margaret Flores, which meant through mutual acquaintances and occasionally directly, a text that she had not answered, an email that she had noted and filed, and most recently a voicemail that she had listened to once for the specific purpose of confirming it contained nothing that required a legal response. It contained nothing that required a legal response. It contained the particular sound of a man who is standing in the space where his architecture used to be and is trying to understand what the ground feels like without the load-bearing walls. He had mentioned the membership at the end of the voicemail, not accusatorially. In the wondering register of a man who has arrived, finally, at a conclusion he does not quite want to say out loud. She merged onto the freeway. The traffic was moving. She set the cruise control at the speed limit and placed her hands at 10 and 2 and drove in the particular equanimity of a woman who has already done the math. The phone went quiet. The freeway opened up. She held the wheel steady and she drove.